for the pups.
Ocala's information station, 1370 WOCA.
Ocala.
All right, 5 minutes after 11 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. Robin, you and I worked for a radio station years ago
Yes.
that we saw slowly dissolve.
Yeah.
It dissolved in the following way. We went from a staff of maybe 10 or 12 people down to basically you and me.
That's right.
And we knew that one day that it was even going to end for us. We knew that this radio station was failing. We knew that things weren't going to get much better, and the people who were paying us basically were always on us about doing this and that and the other thing. And it was the most high anxiety time I've ever had. And I'm not an easy person to get pushed buttons with anxiety. But I remember during those days, we went one weekend over to the Rainbow River. And we've gotten those inner tubes and we floated down that beautiful river, and it was like a 4-hour float down the river.
Yes.
And I remember thinking, why didn't I do this all along? This is the best thing to ease the anxiety, is to float down the river. Of course, I don't know that what we experienced would be considered clinical anxiety, or if it was just us being harried by our circumstances.
Yeah.
Scott Stossel is on the phone. He has written a book about anxiety. It's his own. He's the editor of The Atlantic and a contributor to the New Yorker, the New Republic, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. No wonder he's got anxiety. Look at all these people he has to answer to. The Atlantic again. My Age of Anxiety, Fear, Hope, Dread, and the Search for Peace of Mind. My recommendation to Scott is to come down to Florida and go floating down the Rainbow River. It'll help at least for a day or two. Scott Stossel, good morning, Scott.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on. And that sounds delightful. I think that the cure for everyone is to either actually or metaphorically float down that Rainbow River. It sounds very soothing.
Excellent. But you got a great phone signal, too, by the way. Just a lot of times the phone interviews don't sound this good. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Washington, D.C.
Wow.
Where the Atlantic's offices are.
Wow. So tell me, how are you doing with all of this? It sounds like you've really had issues with anxiety.
Yeah, no, I started struggling with it at a very young age, as many people who develop clinical anxiety disorders do. When I was 4 or 5, and obviously I didn't know that was what the problem was, but I would get acute separation anxiety. If I was separated from my parents, I grew up in a middle-class household. There was no trauma or deprivation, but if my parents were away, I literally wore grooves in the carpet of my bedroom, pacing in circles.
Oh, wow.
Convinced anytime they were away that, they had died in a car crash or had abandoned me.
Oh,
and then
no.
as I got older, I sort of developed a whole collection of phobias, fear of flying and claustrophobia and fear of heights and more unusual phobias. And then sort of, again, this is sort of typical in the way that the disorder tends to unfold over the course of a lifetime, but started getting panic attacks when I was a teenager and young adult. Finally, when my parents, when I was about 10, finally took me to a psychiatric hospital to get evaluated, and that's when I was first diagnosed. But I hid it. Many people with anxiety disorders are well able to conceal it and they try to because of the shame and stigma associated with anxiety. And so, I'm 45 now, and I would go to elaborate lengths to concoct explanations for why I was, disappearing to psychotherapy appointments and keeping my medications hidden away. And only when I published this book in hardcover a year ago did I finally come out with it. And one other thing is that, you mentioned, the stress that you were under when your previous radio station was kind of melting down. And there is a distinction between kind of regular stress, which afflicts all of us, and normal levels of anxiety and clinical anxiety. But for most people, almost everyone has a breaking point where enough stress or trauma can push you over into clinical anxiety or depression. And basically, that's what post-traumatic stress disorder is, which is a form of anxiety disorder. And people who suffer extreme trauma or in war, almost all of us, or at least, say 2/3 of the population, subjected to enough stress will get pushed over to the point where you're suffering from a clinical mental illness.
And in all of the psychiatric sessions you went to, was there anything that indicated to you why you were going through all this anxiety? Why were you so worried about being separated from your parents to the extent that it was clinically anxiety?
Well, no, that's a good question, and I spend a lot of time in the book kind of exploring, what are the root causes of anxiety generally, and in my own particular case, and sort of trying to untangle, how much of it is genes and how much of it is environment, and it's both. I had a super over-anxious, overprotective mother, and a kind of at the time kind of emotionally absent dad who had issues with alcohol, and that's a classic, as the psychologists say, kind of parenting dyad that leads to anxiety. So it could have been the way that they, and this is what Freud would have said, that was I learned being anxious from my parents. They sort of transmitted it to me, and I didn't learn how to soothe myself. By the same token, there's a ton of evidence that one's predisposition to anxiety is largely, almost biological or physiological, and that's sort of programmed by your genes. And when I look back, my mother's parents, particularly her mother, was very worried, and her father, even though he was very successful, kind of had elements of kind of obsessive-compulsive issue. And then her paternal grandfather, my great-grandfather, was a very successful man, but in his 50s sort of broke down from acute anxiety and ended up being hospitalized and having to undergo electroshock therapy because he was so anxious. So I explore all this in the book, and this is just looking at my own family. So it, clearly once, and now the sort of research literature supports that once you have a few anxious people in a family, the likelihood that more people will also be anxious in that family become very high. Wow. And they started to identify, what they call the Woody Allen genes that lead to anxiety and neurosis. So
that's what it looks like. So it looks like Woody Allen. But see, I would be out of line, wouldn't I, if I knew you, and you were expressing this to me, and I said something to the effect, well, why don't we just go float down the river? I think you'll feel a lot better afterwards, because it's a different level of anxiety than what I might have experienced, right?
Well, you wouldn't be out of line, because things like that actually can't. It's all of us are kind of on a spectrum, and something like getting some perspective and floating down the river is probably relaxing. Although actually, I'm terrified of water, so maybe I would be stressed out. Yeah.
Yeah, we wouldn't tell you about the alligators. That would ruin it for you.
Well, so no. This is the irony, is that the irrationality of and this is true of many people with anxiety. I'm afraid of many things that are irrational to be afraid of. I mean, lots of people are afraid of flying, although flying is statistically incredibly safe. It's just I can't make the rational part of my brain, which understands that, communicate that to the part of my brain that is suddenly like I'm trapped in this little metal tube, 30,000 feet in the air. This is not natural. Help! I need to get out. But actually, I have kind of, many people have phobias of rats or spiders or snakes, which makes sense evolutionarily speaking, because they can carry disease.
Sure. Yeah.
But actually, I have no fear of those things. So I have a weird phobia of like cheese. So I joke that I would rather be trapped, put in a coffin full of rats and snakes than put in a coffin full of gorgonzola cheese. Which
that's not. So okay. So do you ever turn to things like sex or drugs or alcohol, and maybe not you, but other people with clinical anxiety?
Well, I mean, yes is the short answer. Big time. And it can be a major problem for some people. I mean, in my own case, for most of my life, I've resorted to, appropriately prescribed medications by a physician, antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications that have been very effective for me, but that at times, but that also have side effects and dependency issues and can lead to addiction issues and things like that. But yes, I mean, for people who suffer from anxiety disorders, they are much, much more likely than, kind of the average person in the population to develop alcoholism, because, there's nothing that more quickly alleviates anxiety, and this is true in my own case, than, a quick toot of, Jameson's or vodka. So it can be a very, but it's a short-term thing, and then you become dependent on, and that can be a very dangerous game to play.
Wow, you're a good-looking guy. I'm looking at your article that Robin printed up for me. You look like Superman. Does it look like Clark?
Yes.
You must be visually impaired.
One of the greatest things about your book is that when people read it and really delve into it is the fact that you've experienced it all, and people are more likely to listen to a person that has experienced it than somebody that is not.
Yeah, no, and I mean, that's what the response I get a lot is, people read it and say, boy, it's like you're talking from my own head, or I thought I was the only person who was going through this, or, you've been going through this and that you've been able to, muddle along and remain productive member of society. And, I wrote the book, partly to explore my own anxiety, partly because I'm interested in the kind of history and science of anxiety. But I've been surprised at the fact that people think that it helps relieve their own anxiety. So you can prescribe it, I guess.
In the book, you recall a time when you were basically describing stage fright, which is something we can relate to. Not the radio show, but like if we're doing a live thing, stage fright is always part of it. And I heard Carly Simon, the singer, one time say that she gets stage fright, and I remember thinking, well, if she does, and she's really famous, then maybe you're supposed to get and just the thought that it's supposed to happen made me able to deal with it better, even though it still happened.
No, I talk about Carly Simon in the book, and she collapsed one time in front of like 10,000 fans in Pittsburgh, and then wouldn't perform for a while. And then when she would go out after that, she'd have her band do all kinds of weird things to kind of distract her from my anxiety, like tickle her or spank her before she went out on stage.
Oh man, how come I'm not in her band? I need to be in her band.
Barbra Streisand, stopped performing for many years, except for charity, because she felt if she was getting paid, the stakes were higher. And no, I was really struck by the number of like really famous people. There's Vladimir Horowitz, who is a great concert classical pianist, and he, maybe the best of his era in the 20th century. And he stopped performing for decades because he was too anxious, and then he returned to perform, but he would only do it if he could see his physician, his personal physician, in the front row at all times, in case he like collapsed or had a heart attack or something.
Oh my goodness.
And then like Gandhi, there's all these famous people. Gandhi, early in his career, he'd try to read, and his hand would be shaking so much that the paper would be, making all this noise, but he sort of overcame that to become, a great spiritual leader. So yeah, I mean, I took solace from the fact that there are all kinds of people who are more famous, more accomplished, more brilliant than me, who suffered from this, and which gave me sort of a feeling of kinship, but many of them overcame it. Either they got cured or they were just able to manage it.
The book is called My Age of Anxiety. Scott Stossel is the author. I have a copy of the book here. If you would like it, give me a call, and it's yours. 622-9622 is the number. The rest of us have to go buy it. Do you want to give us a website or information on how to buy the book?
Sure. You can get it at Amazon or any good bookstore, or you can go to my website, scottstossel.com. That's SCOTTSTOSSEL.com.
Okay, and we'll put that on Facebook so people can find it real easy. Scott, thank you for being on the air with us. And if you're ever in Florida, you can take a boat down the river. The gators won't get to you on the boat.
Well, like I say, I'm afraid it's the water that scared me. The gators, I'm fine with. I assume they want to like cuddle or something.
Hold on. Good morning. You've got the book. Who's this?
Good morning. This is Robert.
Robert, do you know where we are?
Yes, I do.
Okay, you've got the book. It'll be waiting for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, good luck with the book, Scott. Thank you for being on the air with us, and come back anytime.
No, it's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, that was fun. We'll take a little break. We'll be right back.
The weather is brought to you by myfwc.com. Safe boating is no accident. Today will be very warm with more sun than clouds and a high of 82 to 86. Partly cloudy tonight with a low of 60 and a few woodland spots, 67 near the coast. Times of clouds and sun of warm again tomorrow, high 82 to 86. On Friday, clouds and breaks of sun and